AMD's new GPU is $329, and it comes with 16GB of VRAM. Is it worth it, or is 8GB good enough? Today I've got two GPUs that are nearly identical in every way, except for one major difference. Their VRAM. I'm of course talking about AMD's brand new RX 7600 XT that's actually releasing today, and the 7600 non-XT, so let's find out. Welcome everyone to Gamer Melt. When AMD announced their new 7600 XT at CES a couple weeks ago, none of you should have been surprised, and if you were, well, that means you aren't subscribed to Gamer Melt. Ha! Gotcha! What are you doing? Click that subscribe button so you're not out of the loop anymore. Anyway, those who are already knew that the 7600 XT was coming with an unreal 16GB of memory, but what the leaks didn't give us was the number of cores. At the time, I was hopeful that we'd get more, but that unfortunately wasn't the case. The XT variant does give us slightly higher clocks, but the main difference is memory. Now while that sucks, this does give us a perfect opportunity to see whether you really need 16GB at this level or not, because any real discrepancy in performance between these two will likely boil down to that VRAM. With that said, there isn't a reference model this time around. So, as you can see, XFX sent over their quick 309 GPU, which I do have to admit looks pretty nice. It comes with a triple fan design, dual 8-pin power connectors, and the all-black shroud should fit in with most builds. It also comes with a pretty solid aluminum backplate that doubles as a heat spreader, so a big thanks to XFX for sending this over. Though of course, that won't affect my final opinion. Oh, and they just went on sale today, so I'll have affiliate links to this and others down in the description below. It won't cost you anything more, and it helps the channel out. When it comes to specs, this actually comes with a factory overclock bringing the game clock up to 2539 MHz and a boost clock of 2810, making this a fairly nice boost over the regular 7600. So the clocks do end up making a decent difference here. Still, the VRAM is the main story, which brings us to the ultimate question. Is 8GB enough? Better yet, is 16GB overkill, especially for a low to mid-range GPU like the 7600? To find out, we need to first look at some benchmarks between these two cards, where you can see that the 7600 XT does win out over the non-XT variant, though not by all that much, with some notable exceptions that I'll get to in a minute. With that, let's move over to our test bench. As you can see here, past me is running some benchmarks, and wait a second, what's that? It's The Last of Us Part 1 pulling 10 plus gigabytes of VRAM, yet is getting some pretty decent frames. That's not good if you only have 8GB. But here's the point where things get odd. Some people will point out that there's a difference between allocation and utilization. The game that's brought up a lot in this debate is Shadow of the Tomb Raider. You can see here that in 1080p with ultra ray tracing it uses up to 12GB, but when running the same game at the same settings, yet on the regular 7600, it shows far less VRAM usage. But get this, the 7600 XT beats the regular 7600 by nearly 20% at 1080p and almost 15% at 1440p. Now that 15% is close to the 12% clock difference, but it's quite a bit more than other games, especially that 20%. So what's going on? To answer this, games are definitely requesting more VRAM than they absolutely require. But there can be reasons for it. It's not as simple as, oh, it just doesn't need it. And games also act different from one another when they run out of memory, making it hard to know when it happens. As an example, Forspoken just makes their textures look extremely muddy and non-existent, but you don't actually see a slowdown. It's why some people seem to think Forspoken looked horrible when it first came out. Don't get me wrong, it's still not the best looking game, but that's not what a lot of people meant. And maybe games like Rise of the Tomb Raider start doing other things when they don't have enough VRAM, stuff that we may not have noticed yet. The simple fact is that it seems more and more games are requiring more and more VRAM. Take the newest F1 2023. It now tends to like more than 8GB while the 2022 version didn't, at least not as much. Alan Wake 2 is also known for being a VRAM hog, and Jedi Survivor still sucks it up. Now, before you say it, I fully understand those who claim it's just poorly optimized games, that there's no reason for any of these to require this much memory given the graphics we're getting out of them. And that may be true, but it doesn't really matter when it comes to you playing the game, because they're still doing it. With all of that said, there is some good news and some bad news. The good news is that the 7600 and 7600 XT are right at the tip of where you may want more than 8GB of VRAM. You can definitely still get decent frame rates while at the same settings that require more than 8 gigabytes, but if you just turn them down a little, you should be good in most cases. Plus, it's still really just in a few games, and while certain games like The Last of Us Part 1 still technically go over the limit, a lot of the stuttering has gotten better, so their updates are helping. With that said, there is one problem. If you end up using upscaling tech like FSR later on in your GPU's life to maintain playing all the latest games, while it gives you more frames, it doesn't make the RAM requirements go down much. You would think it would, given it's rendering at a lower resolution and then upscaling from there, but as you can see right here, turning FSR on doesn't make that big of a difference. Even cranking it down to performance mode doesn't help all that much. And I actually reached out to my AMD rep to find out what's going on, and here's what I got back. Quote, although upscaling technologies like FSR reduce render resolution, it also comes with its own VRAM requirements and overhead, which may reduce the benefit of the VRAM reduction from rendering at a lower resolution. And that pretty well explains why there isn't much of a benefit. So as games require more performance, using FSR may help you get playable frame rates, but it won't help much with your VRAM needs. Basically, it looks like 8 gigabytes is getting harder and harder to justify, but if you don't mind turning some settings down or maybe turn ray tracing off in certain games, then you should be good. A lot of the higher settings seem to be useless at times anyway, but it might be worth it for many to spend a bit more for that extra VRAM. I just wish it could have been the same price as the regular 7600, but maybe come with 12 gigabytes instead of 16. That would have been an absolute buy. But at $60 more, it's really up to you, though it does seem like 8 gigabytes of VRAM is reaching its end.